So today we are here to talk about the very first part of what I wanted to do is the Aleinu, which is a very exciting prayer, I think, right? You're all familiar with it. Here is a picture of it right out of the Siddur. It's in our Siddur. Anybody know how many times a day do we say Aleinu? You can hold up your fingers to the camera if anybody knows. Oh, I'm saying a few. Abe, thank you. Rivi, thank you. 3. We say it 3 times a day. So you might ask yourself, Rabbi, why are you teaching us about a prayer from the daily Siddur, right? Your mind is about to be blown because this is not actually just the Siddur, right? This is from the Machzor. Whoa! Aleinu is from the High Holiday Liturgy. I'm sure many of you already knew that, and I'm just being obnoxiously big here about the reveal. But Aleinu is part of the High Holiday Liturgy. It starts out the Rosh Hashanah Musaf service, the Malchuyot section. So the question is, why is Aleinu there? What is it doing there? And how did it go from there to our daily service? And my hope is by looking a little bit at its history, at some of the meaning behind it, we can help add some meaning not just to the high holidays, right, which is the overall theme for this program, this class series. But I picked the Aleinu because my goal is I'll teach you something that you won't just use once a year, but ideally you'll use it, maybe not everybody 3 times a day when they go to shul and pray Aleinu, but a few times a year. If you ever find yourself in shul or opening up a Siddur at any service, any time of day, Shacharit, Mincha, Mariv, you'll come to the Aleinu. So it's not just for the high holidays, it's for all year round. So the first thing is, right, what do we already know about the Aleinu? I'm going to switch out here for a second and just, again, it's hard. We want people to use the mute and unmute, but I'd love if in the chat, right, some facts, anything you know about the Aleinu, if you want to throw that in the chat box. All right. I promise this will be less painful if you participate. It was in the Machzor before the Siddur. Great. It was in the Machzor before the Siddur. And in fact, the rabbis really tried hard not to let it go into the daily service. We're going to look at some sources later that say it's part of the daily service. But the rabbis, when it first started, did not want it. They wanted to just be in the Machzor. And people won, right? Popular demand. Could you imagine that? All of a sudden, every Jew starts eating bacon and the rabbis have to declare it's kosher. I don't know if it'll go to that extreme, but that's what happened here in a sense. The rabbi said, do not say Aleinu every day. It is only for the high holiday. It is only part of the Rosh Hashanah Musaf section. And people loved it so much. So it brings us to the second question, not just of how it got there, but why? Why did people love it so much? What about Aleinu made people want so badly to put it in the daily service? And before you answer, because when we get to Aleinu, I know it's almost Kiddush, right? Services are almost over. Remember, it began the Rosh Hashanah Musaf service. There was still a good 2 hours or 3 hours of prayer left when we got to Aleinu there. And people, for whatever reason, liked it so much that they went back to it. Great. Someone else, Eric says there's a mysterious verse that was removed and appears in some Siddurim, but not others. That is phenomenal. There is a mysterious verse that appears in some Siddurim, not in others. And in some Siddurim, it's bracketed or it's small. And that's actually something we're going to look at. Does anybody else have anything they want to add about Aleinu? All right. We'll go on. But if things come to you, please And Ruth and Eric, I really appreciate you guys jumping. It declares our chosenness. Thank you, Morley. We're going to come back to Eric's in a second. It declares our chosenness. When I was a kid, I was taught that Aleinu, much like that verse that we remove, it was removed because it was offensive, was what I was taught. Right? We're to look at some other reasons, but that's what I was taught as a kid. And in fact, the second paragraph of Aleinu that really talks about how everybody else worships nothingness, and Judaism, everyone will turn someday to bow to worship the God of the Jews, our God. As a kid, I heard once from a camp counselor or Madrik or someone that this was a very non-universalist prayer. It's a very particularist prayer, and in a way it was almost racist, right? They didn't quite use that word, but that was the feeling that was given to me. And for a long time, I struggled with it. In fact, I would just say the first paragraph and not the second paragraph of Aleinu for many years because of that. So we're going to look at that and see if that's really the case or not with the second paragraph, or if there's other ways of understanding it. And it's important in the high holidays when the cantor kneels, right? The cantor gets down all the way. They don't just bow like we do the rest of the week, right? You can see my fledgling bald spot. In the high holidays, all the way down onto his knees and onto the floor, the shaliach tzibor, the chazan, the cantor, whatever you want to call them, prostrates themselves before God. So we're going to go really quickly again to Eric's comment, right? Which is, what is that sentence and why was it changed? So I want to look at a couple of sources, right? First, the sentence itself. Shehem mishtachavim lehevel v'rik umitpalalim el lo yoshia. They worship vanity and emptiness and pray to a God who cannot save. So this was taken out because people found it offensive, was the answer that I heard. Which on the one hand, right, I don't know about you, I can understand why this might sound offensive to some people. The question is, what is the context? Who are they talking about? Who are the they that worship vanity and emptiness? And who is the God that cannot save, right? Who are these people praying to this false God? Is this a declaration that Judaism is the only one true faith? Or is there more going on? So there's different answers here. So the first part is, right, this idea of vanity and emptiness, lehevel v'rik. And actually, Abraham ben Azrael of Bohemia, who's in the year 1234, right? It's a bad password, but a cool year to have said something or done something. He said this: I have heard that we should say to vanity and emptiness, right? That line, lehevel v'rik, because the gematria of these words is equivalent to Jesus and Muhammad. So in the year 1234, which is what's going on at that time, I know we can't really participate, but I'll pause there hoping you're talking to your computer, right? What is happening in Europe? We have the Crusades. We have fighting with the Islamic Empire, right? There is a lot of violence going on. And for the Jews, they're just caught in the middle from either Muslim rulers or Christian rulers. They're just caught in the middle. So there's this idea that Abraham ben Azrael of Bohemia adds that this prayer is really about Jesus and Muhammad, right? We're declaring that Judaism is the one true faith, and the gematria, the number value of the letters, he says, adds up for Hevel and Varik to Jesus and Muhammad. So I haven't actually done the math myself, but it seems to hold up. I haven't found sources that say he's wrong on that. Although gematria, you can really find almost anything anywhere, right? That's where, right, Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, and you add up the total number in a word. There's lots of connections you can make with that. But we get later on, Pesach Peter, a Jewish apostate, in the 14th century, charged the Jews with insulting Christianity. He went to the Christian authorities of his time and said, look, they are insulting Christianity. This is a prayer against Jesus. And later again, Anton Margarita, great name, a German Jew who became a Catholic and then a Protestant, he really couldn't choose who he was. He would preach similarly and expressed a similar accusation later in 1530. Right? Martin Luther actually quotes Margarita in his own book about the Jews and why the Jews have some issues, and he's not so happy with us. So there's idea in the Christian world that this was about Jesus and Christianity, and it was insulting, and that didn't go well, right? We lived under Christian authority. There were times that were better and times that were worse, but almost always we lived under Christian authority. So it came to be that Jews really changed this verse. We censored it to get away from the Christian authorities, right? To protect us from them. It didn't help though. Well, two things before we get to that, right? It didn't help that varik actually also has another meaning besides emptiness. It can also mean spittle. And there was actually a custom in Jewish synagogues where when they would get to that line that they would spit. And this here is the spittoon from the Eldridge Street Synagogue in New York City. They also had another little jar of snuff for people that couldn't smoke cigarettes on holidays to partake in communal tobacco, chewing tobacco they had. But this is a spittoon because in synagogue, people would actually pause and spit when they came to this verse. And on top of that, today, that custom is still held in many communities, in some communities. Particularly in Chabad, the custom of spitting is still upheld in some Chabad communities. And in the Shulchan Aruch HaRav, the Chabad Code of Jewish Law, there's a whole section about on Shabbat, are you allowed to rub the spit into the carpet or not when you do that? And I'll speak on behalf of myself and our executive director, right? If you come to Beth Tikva, please don't spit on our floor. Even if it's your custom in other places, please don't spit on our floor in prayers. But there's a whole argument of whether or not on Shabbat you're allowed to rub it into the carpet or not, or if on its earthen floor and all of that. But just avoid it. So this didn't help. So the Christian authorities were an issue, which is part of the reason why we changed the prayer and we edited that out. There's later been a tradition of bringing it back in, which is why in some communities we see it again. In the non-Orthodox world, it hasn't been commonly done, but there are places that do it. In fact, in the Reform movement, in their early Sidurim, they changed many of the later verses that we're going to look at that they also found problematic. Although now in the newer Reform Sidurim, they've moved a little bit back more towards the traditional version of things. The last thing I'll add to all that is Aleinu originally was said silently, but we say it out loud now, or at least the first paragraph we sing out loud. For a long time, the whole thing was sung out loud. And the reason being, this is why I wish we could talk and it be interactive. I'd love to see if anyone can guess the reason why we started singing it out loud, which was to appease the Christian authorities, right? So they could hear that we took out that verse and weren't just still saying it quietly to ourselves. So just think about that for a moment. How much of Jewish practice changed, not because of us, but because of the Christians, right? We're talking about change, right? This prayer, part of it was removed because of, right, our Christian neighbors. We started saying it out loud instead of silently because of our Christian neighbors. Think about how much prayer can change in general, that this prayer was added later on to the Siddur, right? It wasn't a part of that as we established originally. So the next question is, who wrote it? Where does this prayer come from? So the Kol Bo, who is a anonymous book of halakha from the 13th to 14th century. We don't actually know the author of the Kol Bo. The book is just often referred to as the Kol Bo, right? The Kol Bo says is how people quote it. But he says that Joshua wrote this prayer. And the question is why? Where does he get Joshua from? And he tells us Joshua is hidden in the text itself. We can see his name. Again, it's hard with just the chat, but you can type it in the chat or raise your hand if anybody can see Joshua's name hidden in the text. Can anybody find it? Where Joshua signed this acrostic, not acrostic, but signed his name in the words of Aleinu. Got to get sound effects, right? The na, 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 na. In case anyone is still looking, all right, we'll put it up. In these words, which I lined up to be the first letter here in this sentence, but it's not necessarily lines up in the Siddur, but the Kolbo says Joshua is the author, clearly, because here it says Hosea. And for anybody who remembers, back in Bamidbar, Vayikra Moshe leHosea ben Nun Yehoshua, right? Moses called Hosea, son of Nun, Joshua. So Hosea was Joshua's original name. So because the Kolbo finds in this prayer these 4 letters, he says Joshua wrote it. And my question is, why, right? Does that seem like a reach to anybody? Does anybody think Joshua is really the author? Could you find any other names if you were just circling individual letters from the prayer anywhere? Right? We could probably attribute this to anybody from Moses to Genghis Khan if we wanted to just circle different letters. I bet we could spell almost anybody. So the question is, why is there this tradition that the Kolbo is citing that Joshua said it? Where does that come from? So the first part is, right, it's very much written in a biblical style, right? If we look at the language of the first few sentences, the first paragraph is in this biblical coupling, this doublet, right? It is our duty to praise the master of all, to ascribe greatness to the author of creation. See, the second part of the verse, right, mimics the first. It kind of repeats the same idea. Who has not made us like the nations of the lands, nor placed us like the families of the earth? Who has not made our portion like theirs, nor our destiny like all their multitudes? Right? We get this biblical pattern. So it does sound very, very old, but there's more to it, I think, than that in terms of why it's attributed to Joshua, right? Someone said, right, there are a lot of letters. Great, man, thank you. Right, there are a lot of letters in it. We could really cite anybody we wanted. We could quote you as the name of this. But so my next question is, why Joshua? Why would Joshua be this person that people would want to cite and to attribute to him? What is the story of Joshua? When do you suspect the rabbis suggested Joshua composed this? Right? He gets his own book. He's not just in the Torah. He's got his own book. And the answer is, just watching the chat to see if anyone says anything to me. The reason they attribute it to Joshua is they say Joshua wrote this after the walls of Jericho fell. So these medieval Jews who are living in a very uncertain time, they're citing not some later prophet that walked around powerless, begging people to repent and follow God, and right, nobody listened, right? Not some time and later in history when Jews were weak and didn't have authority, but Joshua the conqueror, right? Moses was the quiet, humble leader, but Joshua led the Israelites in battle and conquered Canaan, right? He conquered the land of Israel, the land flowing with milk and honey. He was the one who delivered them into the promised land. So this source of connecting it to Joshua is, in a way, the rabbis going back to this time when Jews were strong, Jews were powerful. This is what they're yearning for. They don't want to feel weak and meek. They want to feel, right, like the warriors of the time of Joshua. But is it really from the time of Joshua? So if we look at the text, there's some issues with that. There's a very late biblical language. So we have Notei Shemayim v'Yosed Haaretz, right? This is a verse from the book of Zechariah, one of the later prophets, which is almost word for word found in the second paragraph of Aleinu, or sorry, in the first paragraph, in one of the paragraphs of Aleinu. We'll get to that more in a bit, right? It's also here in the book of Isaiah, right? Notei Shemayim v'Yosed Haaretz. Shehu Notei Shemayim v'Yosed Haaretz, right? We hear that in the Aleinu, but here it is coming from the later parts of the Tanakh, long after the story of Joshua. So the language makes it unlikely, right? Here's another verse, right? Ki li tikra kol berach tishba kol lashon. To me, every knee shall bend, every tongue shall swear loyalty. The prophet Isaiah said in God's name. And then in Aleinu, we get the same thing. Kilecha, though, is the difference. Instead of kili, to me, because it's God talking, kilecha, we say to God, to you, every knee shall bend, every tongue shall swear loyalty. So we get this late biblical language, which makes me suspect, and scholars much greater than me, that this is not actually from the time of Joshua. More than that, we get some non-biblical language. Melech Malchei Hamlachim, right? We get this phrase, God, King of Kings. But the Torah talks about God as king all the time. The Tanakh doesn't really have a concept of God, especially the early parts, of God as the King of Kings. God is the king. God is the sovereign. God is the ruler. But this King of Kings, that language is not used. Same with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Holy Blessed One. That is rabbinic language. We don't find that in the biblical text. We find that later on in the writings of the rabbis with this other idea of olam. In the Bible, olam really refers to a time, not a physical place. It's only later in the biblical writings that olam becomes this place. So when we talk about litaken olam, repairing the world, right? Tikkun olam, right? It's a place, not a time. So there are all these things that point to the idea that Aleinu was written later on. And most authorities and scholars attribute it sometime to the Talmudic era, right? The 1st, 2nd century. And often Rav is the one it's attributed to, but it could be any rabbi or any source from that time period. But it's still important to remember that the rabbis want to attribute it earlier. One, they want to attribute it to Joshua, right? This powerful, strong Jew. And on top of that, it's also very interesting, I think, right, that they, right, despite its age, right, want to say that it's older. But actually, Aleinu is one of the oldest prayers that we have. Tikkun Olam, for many Jews, for better or for worse, is their right sole Jewish identity, right? It's not going to synagogue. We see this in the Pew poll. We see this in the poll done here in Canada. Going to synagogue for many Jews isn't an expression of their Judaism, but doing acts of tikkun olam, social justice, that for many Jews is the way they express their Jewish identity, an essential part of who they are as a Jew. Tikkun olam has become so central to many, many Jews. This is actually the first case of it in rabbinic literature, is here in Aleinu, right? When it says the tikkun olam, right? To repair the world. And we're going to get to that more in a bit about what that could mean, but just something else to think about, right? The central part of what's become so important for many Jews today has its origins in Aleinu. And tikkun olam for the rabbis, we can see that in the Mishnah and Gittin, means something very different than tikkun olam today. But still this idea of righting something that is wrong, fixing something that is unjust. The other thing is the Aleinu is a prayer, but what is it missing that most prayers have? Right? If you open up your Siddur and you get to almost any prayer, right? You have short prayers like Hamotzi, Baruch atah Adonai l'melech hamotzi lechem min haaretz, right? But it starts out with, praised are you, Lord our God, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam. When you get to some other prayers, like for example, in the Amidah, you get prayers that end with that, right? They end with some type of something, right? I'm saying right a lot, I apologize. So you get to, right, in Amidah, the daily Amidah prayer about the shofar, sound the great shofar for our freedom. Tekah b'shofar gadol lecherutenu. But it ends, Baruch atah Adonai Maccabeats nichayamo Yisrael. Right? Blessed are you, Lord, who gathers in the dispersed of your people. Most prayers have this phrase, Baruch atah Adonai, in some form, either at the beginning or at the end, or in some cases like Kiddush, where it's said at the beginning and the end. But here in Aleinu, we don't get that at all. So Aleinu is not like most prayers. It is one of, if not the oldest prayer in the Siddur, right? Maybe you could point to the Shema or the Ahavta, right? prayers that come from the Torah itself is older. Although even those, right, are hard to call prayers because they're a statement. We're not really asking for anything. Aleinu, at least, right, the Shema, hear Israel, Lord our God, the Lord is one. Shema Yisrael and Echad. You're not asking God for anything. And Aleinu, we're at least asking God to repair the world, to have this time when everything is complete and everything is perfect and everything is good. So we do get some of that. So the question then is, going back to our slides for a second, right? When do we say it? Originally, it was said in the Rosh Hashanah Musaf section, the Maccabeats. The question is, why is it there? And if we look at the last few verses, if anyone was in USY, I don't know if when you were there, we do the greatest tune. I loved it on Shabbat and Mincha for this part, which I won't put you through singing, but there was a box step, a dance that went with it. It was very, very fun. I'm singing it. So anyway, this is why it's in the Malchiyot section, because Malchiyot is Melech, right? That is the root, Melech. It's about God being king. And here we see not less than 6 times in this few sentences from the end of Aleinu do we get the word Melech in some form of the root. Malchutecha v'timloch, malchut timloch yimloch lemelech, right? They will accept the yoke of your kingdom, and you will reign over them soon, forever and ever. For the kingdom is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory, as it is written in your Torah. The Lord will reign forever and ever. And it is said, and the Lord will be king over the whole earth on that day. The Lord will be one, and God's name one. So while this prayer isn't a prayer in the other sense of the Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu formula, it is very much wanting something. And at least this second paragraph is wanting God to be king. That is what we are praying for. So it fits very well. It makes sense in the section that is about Rosh Hashanah, in the Musaf Malchuyot section, the section that's about God being made king, God's coronation ceremony. So the question then is, why did that become something that went beyond that? How did this become part of our daily service? And feel free, again, in the chat, if you have any comments or thoughts or questions about other things, or thoughts on any of these things. I'd love to see what you guys are thinking as we go through this. But sometime in the Middle Ages, it became added to the daily Shacharit service. And here I have a quote from the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is a commentary by the Chofetz Chaim on the Shulchan Aruch, on the major code of Jewish law. And we get some interesting things here, right? In the Middle Ages, it became into the Shacharit. So this is what the Mishnah Berurah says on Aleinu. Right? Magen Avraham, another commentary, Katav b'shem ha'ari, wrote in the name of the Ari, Sheyamruhu echar kol ha'shalosh, right? The Gimel, there's 3, tefilot, v'chen nohagim b'minatanu, and this is our custom in our communities today. So what's he saying? That another source said in the name of another source, the Ari, Rabbi Isaac Luria, right, the father of Kabbalah, that you should say this prayer, the Aleinu, after all 3 daily prayers. And this is the custom today in our communities. That's what he writes here, the Chofetz Chaim writes, that the custom is followed today. But it goes a bit more than that, because he goes on here. And this one I find very interesting, because I don't know any synagogues that follow this custom. But he says, Milvad bebate knesiot gedolot shemipalelin tefilat mariv samuch lemincha, in the big synagogues that connect their afternoon and their evening service to each other, right? Synagogues like we do at Beth Tikva. We just today got together at 7:30 and davened mincha and mariv. So in synagogues like that, Ein omrim aleinu achar gamor tefila mincha. Do not recite aleinu when you finish mincha. Why? De aleinu sheyomru achar tefilot mariv. Because you're going to say it in a bit when you finish mariv. I don't know any synagogue that follows this practice, even ones like ours that connect mincha and mariv together. But he says, don't say it 3 times a day. Say it at the end of the service. And if you're doing Mincha and Mariv connected to each other, you don't have to do it twice. Do it at the end of Mariv, because you've now connected Mincha to Mariv. So there seems to be something about Aleinu being said at the end of the service, which is fair because that's what the Bach says. The Bach, Rabbi Yoel ben Samuel Sirkis, right? He's born in the 1500s. He was a big halachic authority. He said that we recite this at the end of the service to reinforce God's sovereignty before we return to our day after our prayers. So as you leave synagogue, he says, you should be thinking about God is king. God is in charge. God is the ruler. And it makes sense then why you don't have to say it after Mincha, because you're not leaving yet. You're going to say it again in a few minutes. It's meant to be a reminder at the end of the service before you go out into the world. But my real question is, these are all after the fact, right, answers. Because originally the rabbis were against saying this prayer. They wanted instead this to be limited to the high holidays. So the question is, why was this added? Why was this prayer so popular for people? So I'm going to put up on the screen the words of Aleinu. And I would love anyone who has any thoughts to please share them on what Aleinu means. What do you like about it? What do you not like? Why do you think other people liked it and put it into the service every day? And then we're going to get to right, the real reason we're here tonight, which is what message, what meaning can we take from the Aleinu for our lives, for both the holidays and for the rest of the year? So what does it mean? I'll read through it in case anyone can't see, but I would love, as I'm reading through it, you can read through it on your own. And if you have any thoughts about what it means, please right, shout it out, so to speak, in the chat. It is our obligation to praise the master of all, to ascribe greatness to the creator of the world. In the beginning, that God made us not like the nations of the other lands, nor placed us like the families of the earth, who has not made our portion like theirs, nor our destiny like all their multitudes. This is the mysterious verse, right? That some include, some don't. For they worship vanity and nothingness and pray to a God who cannot save, right? And this is where you would spit in some places. Again, please don't spit. Although if you're at home virtually, feel free if you want to. If you're ever joining for virtual services, it's the only time I condone you spitting, when it's your own floor. But we bow and worship and thank the supreme King of Kings, the Holy Blessed One, who extends the heavens and establishes the earth, whose throne of glory is the heavens above, and whose power's presence is in the highest of heights. God is our God, there is no other. Truly, God is our King, there is none else. As it is written in the Torah, you shall know this day and take into your heart that the Lord is God in the heavens above and upon the earth below. There is no other, right? We say that, a node, right? And everyone starts mumbling silently. So one person said, right, it's a declaration of our faith. Sorry, my slides went back there for a second. The declaration of faith, which is great. We've noticed others making a daily pledge of allegiance and wanted one of our own, and found that we already had one made for us. Very interesting, right? I'm not sure if a Pledge of Allegiance was something, I just know the American Pledge of Allegiance because that's where I'm from. I don't know if back then in the early Middle Ages, if that was something that happened, but very much so, right? If there's similar things in other cultures, so much of what we do as Jews is because we saw somebody else doing it, right? Jewish heaven and hell, which yes, we have a heaven and hell, really developed once the Christians had a heaven and hell. Our version, which is different, wasn't really talked about much until we saw all of a sudden the Christian one. Someone else says, or Eric says, the tune is really catchy. It's a great tune for Aleinu. But again, that only came after the fact. It was already being said every day silently before we added it. So it was something about the words people liked. Someone else says, it affirms our unique relationship with God. So we're going to get to more in the second paragraph, a lot of that. Another comment is, I can imagine if you were existing in a world increasingly hostile to Jews, this prayer provides great affirmation for continued practice. I love that answer. And I think that's something really to it, right? This prayer developed in a time when we were powerless. It is cited back to Joshua, possibly the most powerful prophet, not in terms of their prophetic ability, but in terms of their Jewish leadership and strength, right? The only person maybe more famous is a military leader would be Judah from Judah Maccabee. But the Maccabees is not a book in our thing. Yes, throne is misspelled. I apologize. There are typos. If you've only found one so far, though, I'm doing pretty well for myself. What does it mean? Therefore, we put our hope in you, Lord our God, to soon behold the glory of your power. This is the second paragraph. When you will remove abominations from the earth. This is what Morley was saying, this idea of really a Jewish unique relationship that gets drawn out even more in this paragraph. You will remove abominations from the earth. The false gods will be utterly destroyed under the sovereignty of the Almighty, and all humanity will call your name to turn back to you. All the wicked of the earth, all the inhabitants of the world will realize and know that to you every knee must bend, every tongue must swear before you, Lord, our God. They will bow and prostrate themselves and give honor to your glorious name. Honor's not misspelled there. I'm just American. And they will all accept the yoke of your kingdom, and you will reign over them soon forever and ever. For the kingdom is yours, and to all eternity you will reign in glory. As it is written in your Torah, the Lord will reign forever and ever. And it is said, and the Lord will be king over the whole earth. On that day, the Lord will be one, and God's name one. So here we're seeing, right, much more of that idea of that unity. Someone else says, bow down and prostrate themselves before you, right? It reminds how insignificant we are in relation to God. We need a king, a leader. It makes us sound like the chosen people, someone said, right? David was also a warrior before being a king. It's true, but David was not a prophet. Samuel was the prophet in the story of David. David himself, right, never actually was a prophet, versus Joshua holds that role of both prophet and leader. The use of they rather than we, right? There's a lot of things here. We could say the same thing about we worship God, right? We know what's really out there. But it was this paragraph. This paragraph as a kid, I was told was racist. And for many years, I didn't say it. It took later on, before rabbinical school, I had a teacher help me reinterpret it. Right? When I read about, right, they worship false gods, I thought of, right, not Christianity or Islam, because I don't think it's something for a bigger day, but I don't think Judaism is right for me and for Jews, but I don't think it's the only correct, right, religion, which is fair, because the Catholics even now have said that Jews can get into heaven. It took them 2,000 years, but Jews and atheists can now get into heaven. Atheists, interestingly enough, could get into heaven before Jews. But if the Catholics don't say that, right, the only way to be saved is Catholicism, I'm not ready to say the only way to be saved is Judaism. But who then are these abominations, these false gods? For a while, I understood it as fundamentalists, right? People that are willing to get on a plane and hijack it, or walk into a restaurant and blow themselves up, or shoot up a place, right, in the name of God. These are fundamentalists. These are the people who worship a false god. These are the people we're praying for God to remove these kinds of abominations from the earth. Not the minister and the imam I meet with for our interfaith council, not the people I sit with on the Christian-Jewish dialogue, right? Those are people that I get along with, right? We have different ways of connecting to God, but I have a hard time thinking that these words speak about them. Even more so, I want to say that when we look at when it was written, Christianity wasn't a thing yet. Islam certainly wasn't. Christianity was just starting to be a thing. This is really about paganism. This is written during the Second Temple. This is written when we are in exile, when the temple is shortly destroyed by the Greeks and the Romans. Right? This is written in a time when we are powerless, and we're talking about multiple gods, not one God, not people that worship Jesus or Allah, not Muhammad. This is not a different way of understanding the one God. This is about pagans. So I very much think it's something to hold in our minds, right? When we say this, what is the context? But the question then is, what is the meaning for us today? What can we learn from this? Where can we find meaning in this for us now? And that's what I want to think about. When we say this at Rosh Hashanah this year, what should we be thinking about? And I think the secret to that is to put ourselves in the shoes of the author, right? I could share with you different commentaries. Like there's a Hasidic teaching that Ein Od, there is no other, is interpreted in the Hasidic world. There's a Hasidic rabbi who says that instead of there is no other God like you, it means there is nothing other than you, God, right? Everything is God. God is the good things, God is the bad things. God is me, God is you. God is in all of us. We are all part of God. God is the universe, right? It's very much Spinoza or later Mordechai Kaplan in that kind of a thought. It's a panentheism. But I don't want to go into specific commentaries. I want to ask, what do you think the author of this prayer intended when they wrote this? What were they feeling? Right? Not were they writing this about Christians or pagans? What was the emotions that had a person put pen to paper, right? Or hammer and chisel to tablet, finger to iPad, right? Whatever your method of typing is. What led them to put these words right out there? And the second half is, why did it become so popular? Why did it include it in such an important service and become so popular that everybody wanted to put it in everything? So I'm going to pause for my breath, and if anyone has any more answers. I'm seeing a few things in my chat. Great. So there's an answer here from Rhoda, which I really like. Is Aleinu trying to reassure us that one day we shall see the world as Hashem envisioned it in the beginning? Absolutely. I think this goes back with what Madeline was saying, right? The idea that, I want to find it again, right? You're existing in a world that's increasingly hostile to Jews, right? The author is living in a world where the temple is destroyed, not once, but twice. Twice the temple is destroyed. And this is a reminder, right, that things will get better. And this became so popular that it was said every day, not because the rabbis wanted it done, right? Rabbis can beg and beg and beg people to say prayers or go to shul or keep Shabbat. But if people don't do it, it doesn't happen. Here they begged and begged and begged, don't say this prayer, it's going to lose its specialness. But people kept saying it every day in every service because it was so meaningful to them. Because you're talking about people that lived through the Inquisition, through the Crusades, through pogroms, through intifadas, through holy wars, through all sorts of persecutions, right? Through martyrdom. There are stories in different generations and time periods of Jewish martyrs going to their death, with the Aleinu being the last words that they say. Because it's about hope. It's about faith that even though today things are awful, even though today things are unfair, things are unethical, even though today it looks like there is no hope, there is evil, and I can't understand why. There is injustice, and God is not stopping it. Right, that someday God will. It's a pleading from somebody from their heart trying to make sense of the world, put order in an inorderly world. I love this. It was perhaps written by an ancestor of John Lennon. Imagine, right? That's what it is. It's imagining a world where things can be. And more so, we are partners in it. It is not just solely about waiting for God to do these things, but we have a place in this, right? We put our hope in God, right? We need God to do God's part, but we're doing our part. We have the obligation to praise the Master of all. We have the obligation to proclaim God's name throughout the world, to tell people that there is something out there. Whatever you're worshiping, whether it's power, whether it's greed, whether it's your own self, whether it's money, whatever it is, that's not the end all be all. There is someone out there and there will be justice. We have a role in this too. And every day we would say this before we left synagogue and went back out in the world as a reminder. Every day the rabbis wanted us to remember that there is hope, that there is order, that there is a future where the world will be completed. Letaken olam, right? The world will be fixed. It is broken today. And this prayer is about that brokenness. And I think that in every generation, as Jews, we have had a reason to say this prayer. And that's why it's become such a popular folk prayer. And it made its way from the Machzor to the Siddur to the daily service. But all the more so this year. Right? We're seeing all sorts of rising anti-Semitism on the left, on the right. We're seeing rising hatred and violence, not just in the US and in Europe, but here in Canada. Here in Canada, Jews have been attacked for walking on the streets and being Jewish. Right? As we're planning to come back to synagogue safely with COVID, we're also planning how can we come back to synagogue safely from people that want to do us harm, not just a microscopic virus, but human beings. So this prayer and that meaning is still just as relevant today in 2021, sadly, as it was in the year 400 or the year 1200 or the year 1500. It's just as relevant. But today, this year, we've seen so much pain, so much suffering, so much misery, not just for Jews, but for everybody at the hands of COVID, right? At the hands of mismanagement and greed, at the hands of selfishness and people only caring about themselves and not caring about their neighbor. We've seen so much additional suffering on top of the virus that's been compounded. So I think this prayer this year can really be there for us. As we say it in Rosh Hashanah as part of the Malchiot section, a reminder that even if this year we've lost somebody we've loved, even if this year we've suffered, people we know have suffered, or we're just sick and tired of seeing all the suffering in the world, that's not the end of the story. The story has another ending. And as Jews, we have hope and we have faith that if we keep doing our part, if we keep having faith and holding true to our ideals, to the God of the Torah, not just in the sense of keeping Shabbat and worshiping, but the God who tells us to feed the hungry, clothe the naked, visit the sick, to give tzedakah, not because it's charity, but it is commanded, it is justice, is what we have to do. If we hold up our end of the bargain, someday God will hold up God's, and the world can be perfected. If we can bring that message to others, not that their gods are empty, but in God, in those values of the biblical God, the God of justice, of righteousness. If we can promote that rather than fundamentalism, whether it's Jewish, Christian, or Muslim, or Hindu, Buddhist, whatever you want to have, right? Mormon, Scientology fundamentals, I don't care. But if we can promote a belief in a divine that cares about justice and righteousness, about tzedek and mishpat, then we can repair the world. And we can put order to that chaos. We can find meaning in it. and we can end the ongoing suffering. And that is why the rabbis put this back to Joshua, because Joshua is the last time we really as a nation felt powerful, felt in control of our destiny. And as we go together for the holidays this year, I hope that maybe we can use this as a reminder to ourselves to inspire us to action for this year. And it's easy to forget, which is why the rabbis say it every day after every service. This is a message we need every time we leave our Jewish space, our spiritual space, and we go back into the world. This is a message we need. So remind us of it throughout the year, but that we can go into the holidays with a sense of hope, a sense of faith, a renewed energy, that we will do our part and the rest will come. I want to thank you so much. I want to wish everyone a Chag Sameach, a happy, healthy new year. And I'll stick around and we'll make it so people can unmute if anyone wants to talk or say anything. But thank you so much. I really hope you enjoyed. And please come back next week. Rabbi Becca Walker is teaching next week. The week after, Rabbi Jared Grover. And the week after that, Michael Rubin. I'm so excited that we get to do this joint learning together. I'm sorry that we don't get to do it in person where we get to meet each other, because I would love to meet some of the Beth David members and for them to meet some of the Beth Tikva members. But at least this way we all get to meet some of the clergy and people, the leadership of both shuls. So it's been a pleasure. My screen froze a little bit. Doris, if you can help us just make it so people can unmute themselves if they want. But we'll go now to just unspotlighted and gallery view, and anyone who wants to say hi, feel free. Anyone who wants to go watch the Olympics, enjoy. Bechatzlacha. Have a great night.
Thank you. It's excellent. Thank you.
Hi, Renee's mom.
Hi. How are you, Doris?
Good. Nice to see you. Thank you for joining us. Thank you.
Enjoying it. Yeah, it was wonderful. Wonderful.
Great. Fabulous.
Thanks, Sharon. Glad to have you with us. And thank you, everyone who participated in the chat. I really appreciate it. And everyone else for just joining us. I appreciate that as well. It's really, really nice to have everyone here.
So everyone does have the capability of unmuting yourself now.
Yes, if anyone would like to unmute and say hi. To me or to anyone else, I'm seeing a lot of messages in the chat, so I appreciate it. So thank you. Thank you. Everyone's too kind. Too kind. I don't know how you guys kept me going that long and just, turn off the volume on your computer. But it's a pleasure. I appreciate the messages. All right, everyone seems to go, so we'll end it. But thank you so much, everyone. And Doris, thank you very much for helping me to manage the Zoom. I'm glad we had you, because I had some computer problems there.
This was great. So, thank you, everyone.
Give us the peace sign, which I think is a good way to end it. So be well, everyone. And Shana Tova Umetuka. I hope I'm the first one, but not the last one, to wish you a happy, healthy, and a sweet new year.